Thank you for joining us, Omar.
Thank you, Teresa, for having me.
My pleasure. I can't wait for our listeners to hear you today. Let's start with your article that I read on Oprah.com, Gratitude, the Antidote to a Fear-Driven Life, which I thought was excellent. And it's where you describe your journey into gratitude and you talk about the importance of presence. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you see mindfulness and gratitude connected.
Absolutely. You know, it was about 5 years ago that I went on a silent retreat for the first time in my life. And at the end of the 6 days, I had a chance to talk with the monk. And he looked at me with his grizzled beard and put his hand on my shoulder and, really imparted some wisdom because I didn't have any great epiphany. And I said, all I really realized was how impatient of a human being I am. And with his hand on my shoulder, he said that the root word in Latin for impatience is patis, which means to suffer. And he said, that is your burden to carry. And I said, gee, thanks. That's great advice, feedback. I asked, though, how are you supposed to move in the world and want to get things done and be non-attached at the same time? And he said that non-attachment does not mean indifference. So you can still care and be non-attached at the same time.
Okay.
And so a light bulb switched and I started to meditate every day, twice a day for 6 straight months.
Wow.
And at the end of it, I actually realized that I was even more stressed out than I was before because now I had sort of 40 minutes that I was trying to account for in each day. And then I came across the work of Ellen Langer. And she said, you can meditate or just be mindful. And I said, that sounds way more straightforward. She defines mindfulness as just the simple act of noticing change. That sounded way more doable. But there's this Asaro tribal saying that knowledge is just a rumor until it's felt in the bones. And I stumbled upon the practice of gratitude. I didn't find gratitude, gratitude found me. And what it taught me was for the first time to pause and just appreciate the good in my life. And so if meditation is the practice of noticing each breath, mindfulness is the practice of noticing change, gratitude is the practice of noticing good. And what you're really training yourself is noticing. Where your attention goes is where you go. And that to me is the through line with all of these practices.
Beautiful. I love that. How did you come up with the idea, or how did this come about where you ended up coupling gratitude with relationships?
Mm-hmm. So gratitude is a social emotion. And it's not just about your own noticing. It's really about your noticing in relationship to others. So gratitude is inherently a reminder that you're part of something bigger than just yourself. And that's really what I love about gratitude, is that it is at that intersection of your own self-care and your relationships. And I think for me, too much in the United States in particular is individualistic. And I think what this pandemic is showing us is how interrelated we are. Gratitude really is about making visible what you value. And you make invisible what you take for granted. And so part of what you're trying to do is really recognize how connected you are and that you're not by yourself. Your pain is sort of in the moment, but when you take a step back and sort of see all that is beautiful and good, then it sort of puts what you're going through into perspective.
Wow. That's very true. I'm noticing it a lot myself, what I took for granted before. So in our workshops, we combine mindfulness with change management with neuroscience to try to really boost people's ability to make positive change in their lives. And I know that you believe and practice with neuroscience and it's how it affects or how it is integrated with gratitude. Could you kind of maybe share what that looks like?
Absolutely. So the first part of gratitude as a practice, and not just as an emotion that you feel, is the noticing. And that noticing allows you first to just recognize what is going on and taking that beat. But it's really then the second step of the practice, which is to then pause and to actually feel the experience of it. And when you pause to actually absorb the experience, you're creating emotional muscle memory. You're really allowing yourself to say, oh, there is something positive, there is something good, there is something beautiful. And I'm not just going to go whiz by it, but I'm actually going to pause and to appreciate it. That pause to appreciate it is in our everyday language when you talk about smelling the roses. It's not just about seeing the rose, it's actually pausing to smell the rose. And that's when you really begin to not just react to your environment, but rewire your brain so that you create the ability to see positive things more easily the next time. And that's where the neuroscience comes in, because as human beings, our evolution is wired in our brains to see things in a negative way. And so we're used to seeing threats and what's around the corner. And so the practice of noticing good is then in a direct contrast to that very sort of animal part of our evolution, which is say we can move beyond the threats and we can actually be a little bit more conscientious and intentional about our energy and our attention.
Great. And when you are going through that process, so if you were going to start a gratitude practice, so the first step sounds like it'd be to notice the rose, second step to smell the rose, then what do you do with that? Or what do you do after that?
I think there's a couple more steps. And I think for me, it's from the noticing to the feeling to then being able to actually acknowledge the negative, but from a place of gratitude. And I think that's where it's not you're going to react to the negative, but really be able to say, okay, what am I feeling right now? What is that suffering? What is that pain? And how can I look at it not from a reactive point of view in the moment, but pause, orient to what is good, absorb that experience, and then acknowledge what is difficult. To continue the metaphor of a rose, every rose has a thorn. And you can see that thorn as a threat or actually something that is just trying to protect what is precious. And so do you react from a negative point of view because you feel threatened, or what is it that you're truly trying to protect? And if you focus on what you're truly trying to protect, it's usually something positive. And so really being able to move through and appreciate what is good, that's where you learn to trigger your positive emotions so that you don't get triggered by your negative ones.
Excellent. Excellent.
The last step, if I may,
Oh, sure.
is really about connecting to others. And so gratitude, again, is about you being part of something bigger. And so this is where we give thanks to someone or to something. Giving is receiving. And so taking that emotion and orienting it to all those people who you don't even see, who are actually making what is possible. That's one of the silver linings, if you will, of this pandemic, is we are appreciating the healthcare workers. So even if we are not in a hospital, there are so many people who are sacrificing time with their own family who are not staying at home. We appreciate the grocery workers who are making sure that food is still available, the delivery workers, all these people who are allowing us to stay at home. And so while it may be difficult to not go out and to, in some ways, have to go in, there are still so many people that are making that possible. And so this is where, if giving is receiving, it's really about being able to see and then being seen. It's that witnessing that is so powerful of a practice. And again, all of this begins with noticing. That's what witnessing does, is it acknowledges the humanity in others. And when we are able to do that, then we ourselves are also being seen, and our humanity is restored as well.
Beautiful. Well, I asked you on the show today, obviously, to talk about the app, gthx. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and how it came about.
This has been one incredible journey. I actually spent 20 years in finance and real estate. And I had no idea when I went on that silent retreat 5 years ago that the trajectory of my life would totally shift. I realized at the time I was running a nonprofit to reimagine the 51-mile Los Angeles River. And yes, LA has a river. And in fact, downtown LA is located where it is because of the Los Angeles River. Los Angeles is actually named after its river. I was working with the architect Frank Gehry. It was very exciting to really imagine resiliency at a totally different scale. But I realized that it's so much easier to try to change the world than to change yourself. And I am a father. I have 2 daughters. If I didn't have daughters, there'd be no gratitude practice. The skills that it takes to get big infrastructure projects done are very different skills than what it means to be a good dad, a good husband, a good human being. And so this practice of gratitude really started to shift my orientation in life. And at one point, I finally got to the realization that I didn't want to move bricks and sticks. I wanted to move hearts and minds. And that what I really cared about was people. And as I look to the future and I look at climate change, we're not going to build ourselves out of the solution. What we're going to do is change our culture, our hearts and minds, and our values. And so the practice of gratitude is really about behavior change. What is it that I can do? And I started with me. I shared what I was doing with a friend, and he said, Omar, we've got to do something with this. He happened to be the head of digital for the Oprah Winfrey Network, and so I listened to him. And a couple years later, we developed this app called gthx. The original inspiration were prayer beads. If you think about prayer beads, they're like the original wearable technology. For thousands of years, people literally counted their blessings. Science is now catching up to what spirituality has long known. Gratitude works. And it's simple. The beads themselves were just a physical reminder of our intentions. The counting was a simple routine that allowed us to manifest that intention. And the reward was that we were rewiring our brains. Now, we were attributing that to many other things, and we still can, but we also now know the neuroscience behind it, that when we have a practice, it's simple. It's a reminder, it's a routine, and a reward, and that's really what we tried to create in our app. So you have daily prompts, you have ways to help you notice what is going on in your life. We have over 100 plus guided gratitude practices, from the head of UCLA's mindfulness program to the actor George Takei. And we have really, I would say, innovative techniques that just allow you to do those 3 things. What is a simple reminder? It might be an inspirational quote. What is a simple way to give thanks? Literally tapping a button, to lighting a candle, to journaling your thanks. And then the reward is that you're part of something bigger. So we have a public journal that really allows people to share what they're going through. And that has really been the most powerful, particularly now with the pandemic, is you're just hearing these stories of people truly appreciating what they have and recognizing the sacrifices that so many people are there making in order for them to have the day that they have, the home that they have, the moment that they have. And that's really what we tried to capture in our app. And as part of the pandemic, we also made it free. And so this was really where we felt like, where can we contribute the most? And we felt like this was our way. When you have now almost 22 million Americans, and who knows what around the world, unemployed. And so when we know that mental stress is going to be increasing, we know that unemployment is increasing. So the last thing we wanted to do was to create a barrier to people being able to practice gratitude. Gratitude is an antidote. So let's give this vaccine away.
That's great. And how would people get the app?
So we're in the Apple Store, and I'm excited to share that as of this morning, we are now in the Google Play. So whether you're on Android or on an iPhone, you can now tap into gthx. It's fun, it's irreverent, if you can tell by our name. This is not about sort of holier than thou. This is not a place of judgment. This is a place of joy. The best way to create a new practice is to have emotional success. So let's make this fun. Let's make this easy. And the cool thing is that the gratitude's already in you. You're literally wired for it. And so we're just really creating the space and the mechanisms to make that possible. If you imagine just how much a prayer bead made a difference across time, across faiths, across cultures, now we can do that with the latest technology.
That is wonderful. And I'm so appreciative that you've made it free for everyone. And I'm also appreciative it's in the Android store now, since I'm the sole person in my company that still uses Android. So I've been looking forward.
You and 70% of the world, so.
Okay, good. Everyone else in my office has an Apple. I'm like, I can't get in. Okay, so I do appreciate that. And I also appreciate the work that you're doing, because I think at this time people do need not just comfort and empathy, but they need tools and they need a way to give back. I think that the act of giving is very healing. And so it's wonderful that there's this tool that they can use where they can do that even from their own homes. So I thank you very much for that.
So this moment is, we're experiencing massive change. And to me, one of the tools that we're looking for is resiliency. So resiliency is our ability to adapt to change. Pre-COVID-19, the world was really based on efficiency. How fast can I get from A to B? Now, we don't know what B will be. And so it's not about how fast we can move. It's really about how well can we adapt. And that's really what the practice of gratitude allows us to do, because the practices that we adopt are the ones that allow us to adapt. And it's always been that we become what we practice. And so this is a moment while we're staying at home to put these practices in place. We don't need to go to the gym to exercise our gratitude muscles. They're here in our homes. They're with us wherever we are. And so that's really my hope for this moment, is that people use the time, if they can, to adopt these practices so that they can better adapt to the environment ahead.
Yeah, that's such a powerful concept, and I totally agree. So I do hope everyone downloads the app to whatever device you have. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's a beautiful message, and I hope everyone practices it.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for having me and for sharing your practices. And that's really, I think, what's important, is that together we'll get through this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Stay well.
Thank you. Take care.